So I grew up in a place called Aotearoa, New Zealand, a small nation in the South Pacific. I come from the west coast of the North Island, and I come from a Māori community there called Ngāti Raukawa. And so I was born and raised there, but have spent a number of years in Canada now and live here, or live in Kelowna on unceded Silk territory, and I work at the University of British Columbia, and there's a campus here in the Okanagan, and I'm currently a faculty member in the Indigenous Studies program, and so I do research and I do some teaching work as part of that. Yeah.
Nice. So you teach, you mentioned earlier today when we had coffee that there's a new course that came out that you're teaching. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So we had some conversations with the exercise and health science program, and so the program that you're in, and they were looking at building in more Indigenous education and knowledge, and so we got talking, and so we came up with an idea to teach a course focused on Indigenous physical activity and health. And so I helped to kind of teach that and gives the students in that program a chance to get some content that they wouldn't normally get. It's kind of quite far outside of what the normal teaching is there, but in that way it offers a lot, I think. And so the students so far, I feel, appreciate the different perspective that we can bring onto the same, topics and challenges that they face in their regular line of study.
What is your perspective on Indigenous health? Like, what made you want to get into this field of study? Do you have any philosophies around it? Yeah.
So in New Zealand, the question, who are you, which is ko wai koe, and the question, where are you from, no hea koe. In English, they're different questions, but where we come from, they mean the same thing, like who are you and where do you come from? And so when people ask me who I am, like a logical place for me to go is where I'm from. And so the part of the country that I'm from and the community and culture that I come from is really shaped a large part of who I am. And so when thinking about health and well-being, I think that those cultural perspectives are ones that really shape what that means, and that much of what people are exposed to here in Canada and same as back home are many ideas that are very different from our traditional ideas, that they can often actually be really unhelpful, really unhealthy ideas about that. And so staying grounded in that approach is one that I think is really useful, and one that Indigenous communities really find sets them on the right track. And so when I think about health and well-being, I think that bringing that cultural lens is a really important part of that. Yeah, so we had a good conversation about colonization, and we got onto the topic of land. And so there's been a lot of confiscation and taking of Indigenous lands, and that happens too in contemporary times in new ways. We see deforestation, the damming of rivers, mines and the pollution from mines, and so there's many ways, and there are direct ways in which the land has been, or there's a disconnection and a taking away that's very direct. But also we talked about how there are indirect ways in which loss of land takes place. And so we talked about things like the loss of culture and the loss of language. And when those things are suppressed or hidden or taken away, that the way in which we engage with land is actually different and can become colonized. And so there are direct ways in which the land has been taken, but there are also these other important ways that disconnects us from the land, and so those become really important to understanding colonization and the loss of land. And there is research that points to the strong relationship between loss of land and the community's health and well-being. And again, those happen in many kind of direct and obvious ways, but also in many those indirect ways, those subtle ways that may not be as obvious. And they certainly impact us and our well-being. So colonization and colonialism are two of the more important ideas that you really need to have a good grasp on if you want to understand the current state of Indigenous well-being. And that has had a direct impact in many ways, including our physical bodies. So one example of that, we could look at type 2 diabetes, and that part of that particular disease is how we process food and sugars. So right down into the chemical reactions in the bodies, right? I believe colonialism has that kind of reach and impact. And so if we look at some of the history, hundreds of years ago there was little to no diabetes in North America. Even 200 years ago, even 100 years ago, there was little to no diabetes within Indigenous communities. But you start to see in the 1970s, the 1980s, diabetes starts to become much more prevalent in communities. It varies quite a lot from community to community, but you see these patterns where all of a sudden it's become a major problem. And then you start to think, well, why at that particular time did that happen? And so I think if you go back just a generation or two, through the 1950s, 1960s, you see large changes in people's lives, the jobs they do, the types of food they eat, the levels of activity they do, many changes, the changes in culture and assimilation that happen. So once you spend 10, 20, 30 years in that context, then you start to see some of these negative outcomes, and one expression of that I think is diabetes. And so it kind of took a little bit of that time for that to come up, and that really speaks to those changes in assimilation during that time, and still is a major part of Indigenous communities across the continent, across the world, really. And so there you have, like I was saying, something in the body, very physical, but is due to a whole host of colonization and colonial experiences. And so for me, colonialism has affected us, in body, mind, spirit and land, but the physical is just one way in which our bodies have changed and continue to suffer as a result.
It's like a byproduct, basically, of colonialism, with like the introduction, with like through the Indian Act and like us having to rely on Indian agents for rations of food, and then this like introduction to the sedentary life of like say through residential schools, having to sit at a desk all day, where prior to colonization our education came from land-based activities, and then it switched to having to sit in a desk all day, and then along with that, like taking our language, we can't speak our language, we can't practice our culture, the assimilation and everything, and through that, like generation to generation, the compounding effect is like diabetes is just a byproduct of that. Yeah, I think that's probably how I understand it too, is that many of those things, like being taken away from your family, your community, from the land, the abuses that took place, the ways in which Indigenous peoples and cultures were just looked down upon as just so much less than, that diabetes is going to be one expression or result if you're going to treat a group like that and put a group through that. And there's many types of ways in which that affects people's health, from their mental health as well as their physical health, as well as them spiritually too, I think. And so so for me, those impacts are directly related to
to how we live today, right? And how we understand ourselves, how we understand our bodies, how we understand our culture, and how we are active or not is all connected to those types of histories, for sure.
I really liked what you said earlier today when we were talking about, we were sitting down and we were really brainstorming on where do we go from here? So much deeper than putting physical activity in a little box and then looking at it through like a scientific way. Like how do we really decolonize our approach to movement in this modern day?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And so I think maybe one of the places to start is to really look at how you understand the world and what is your mindset. How is your thinking about physical activity? Much of what we're exposed to and much what we see in on the media, what we get from the education system, for me is very much a science-driven, a capitalist-driven, and a colonial kind of framing of what physical activity is. And for me, I think that's a real barrier. And so one thing I think we can all do about physical activity or about all parts of our lives is to kind of have a good check and kind of look inward and say, how am I understanding this? I think a lot of the messaging that you'll hear is, you should be skinny, you should be going to the gym, or spending your time going for a run or a yoga class. And that it's kind of up to us to make our bodies kind of physically strong and healthy. But for me, that works for some, but for many people, I don't think that works, and I think that it puts them off. And so really taking a step back and thinking about what does it mean to be active, and how is that going to be a part of my life, and that it doesn't have to be in those very ways that we were saying, like very much in a box. And so maybe let me give you some examples. One way that I like to think about physical activity is to not so much that you're going to dedicate part of your life to being physically active and then you do something like going to the gym or signing up to a basketball league or something, is to actually focus on other things that are your strengths and that you can easily build upon. And so if it's the case that you are really interested in plants, you're really interested in medicines, going out and collecting and gathering and learning them is a way that you get to do something you love, but as a result you're actually being active. Another way could be that getting outside the box of just the physical is really important. And so if there are things like spiritual connections to activity, if it's the case that being on the land creates a connection, if it's the case that you need to go to certain places to engage in different ceremonies or different prayers, those types of things can actually get you moving and get you going places. I know I've heard of people back at home, they actually go back and retrace some of the journeys of their ancestors, right? And so it's actually going back, maybe even doing a little bit of training and preparing to walk for that long, and then going and doing that. It adds this extra layer of connecting with their ancestors, with their community, with those specific places. And it's actually by doing that is really the part that drives them. But as a result, they've been active and they've been moving. And so it always doesn't have to be a focus on trying to move the body. And in fact, I think for many Indigenous peoples, it's actually when their culture and their identity is reaffirmed that it makes them more likely to be active. And so, it doesn't always have to be about moving your body. Those other stuff really make it much, much richer, I think. And then another thing that I think about too is much of the world around us is very individualistic and capitalistic, and I find that if Indigenous peoples do things as pairs, as groups, as families, like extended families, that actually it's those bonds that help people to have fun, to be motivated, to get all kinds of other things rather than just the moving of their bodies. So if there's ways in which you can get together with your friends or your family, that can actually make for a much richer experience and is much more sustainable. And again, if people like that social aspect, people should build on that strength. Right, it's already there, and so use that as a way to think about how you want to be active, and that if you're having fun, you know, taking your kids for a bike ride or something, then it could be about that. It doesn't have to be about you know, trying to train your body or to get your body in a certain kind of physical shape. And so at the end of the day, or at the end of the year, if you've been moving a lot, that's really the goal. And that it doesn't have to be about the physical. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. It should be about all that other good stuff that people get.
Yeah. So how can we strengthen and decolonize our relationship with movement?
Yeah. One of the things that I had come across was from back at home, an educator around physical activity. And his big thing was connecting your humanity with your spirituality. And so one thing that I recall from listening to him was connecting to your breathing. And in our culture we have many deities or gods, and all of them really are part of the natural environment. So we have a god of forests, we have a god of the winds, god of the seas, like we have many of these. And so this god of the wind is a big one, and his name is Tawhiri Mātea, and he's a lot of our creation stories and stuff. And so when he goes out and he's, say, going for a bike ride, and when you're there and you start to huff and puff and right, that's you engaging with Tawhiri Mātea. And so just by having that frame of mind that you're actually connecting with the world, with Tawhiri, it actually changes that experience, right? And so this is what we were talking a little bit too about, a cultural framework to understanding ourselves and the things that we do. And for me, it just took things to a whole another level that I wasn't exposed to when I grew up. And what people don't talk about physical activity like that very much. And so if you find a way that again connects you to things that are deeper, including your spirituality, including your connection to the land, to your culture and to your identity, it takes things like going for a run or going for a swim or walking to a different level, because it actually connects you to a past and to other people and your ancestors that yeah, again, I just never heard or came across. So it's things like that I think that would be really useful for reframing physical activity, so that we can, you know, get on with this business of making the culture a part of our lives, really enriching how we understand ourselves, and as a product of that, you know, people will be more likely to be active and engage in different types of activities. And so for me, that felt like an empowering kind of approach to being active, which is to not focus on the activity, but to focus on some of those other things. Yeah.
White Huskahalt, the squeeze chikakskam, sama squeeze Rhino Laverius. Hello, good day everyone. This is Decolonizing Wellness. Movement is medicine, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Jay Lorraine.
Tanse. My Cree name is Wakaskachisgrau, and my English name is Shayla Rain. And yeah, so today we're going to be talking about physical activity, movement, and wellness.
So yeah, we talked with Braden Tahiwi. He works at UBC Okanagan, and we just talked about physical activity and decolonizing movement and getting back to like our traditional ways, and we just talked about a lot of things, and yeah, it was good. So one of the questions I want to ask is, what ways have you incorporated being on the land while being active?
It's a loaded question. Well, I like doing our morning walks. I think that is like the first thing that comes to my mind. It's really simple, but having those walks on the land in the morning, even runs too, I think that's a simple way to just connect with land while incorporating physical activity too. Other ways would be dancing powwow at like the outdoor powwows and stuff, and even just practicing powwow outside. That also ties in with like connecting your culture, physical activity, and being on the land. And like Braden Tahiwi said, it also, how did he say it? It like reinforces like your identity, is what he said.
Yeah, it reinforces your identity when you use culture to embrace like physical activity and whatnot. So like that could be powwow dancing, that could be on the land gathering medicines or gathering plants or foods, and like harvesting a deer or something like that. Just being on the land and like incorporating your culture, it can be very strong, and it can be very good for adherence because it's something that you just do because it has like your sense of like who you are when you're doing those things. So it's really good for adherence and whatnot. So yeah. So like, yeah, I agree. Like we did our morning walks. We'd go paddle boarding or biking or stuff like that. And yeah, it just feels so good to be outside. If I could, I would rather be outside working out than inside of a gym, you know, like getting that vitamin D and whatnot. What are your thoughts on following the status quo in regards to physical activity? Like the things that you see all the time, like going to a gym, yoga, Pilates, things like that, you know?
Well, those are the things that you see, like the front cover of fitness. I don't think anything is wrong with it. I feel like though, as someone who has gone to like spin classes and has been into weightlifting in the gym and everything, I do know that there is a lot of like intimidation around it. If you're a certain body type, you may feel like you don't really fit into those spaces, or if you don't know how to properly use equipment, it can be really intimidating to show up at a gym and then try and learn how to use those equipment, because like you risk getting injured or like embarrassing yourself in front of people. I think that there is a lot of pressure around those things, speaking from like a personal experience. But there are other ways to be fit. You don't have to just go to the gym and go to a fitness class. There's, you know, once you open up like fitness and like not put it in such a small box, it can be really liberating, because fun things can like make you live a life of wellness, you know, like going for walks, going for runs, trying new things, dancing, berry picking, hunting, stuff like that. Like, I think that there's definitely different ways of fitness, and it isn't just like a straight arrow path. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that those things have their place. Like, what are your goals in for fitness, you know? Like, going to the gym and lifting heavy weights because you want to be great at football. Like, that makes sense. But I think you really have to have that self-awareness of what you want to do and like what your goals are and whatnot. Like, my goals are to feel great and for longevity and not like injure my joints and stuff like that. Like, I was getting into like powerlifting and stuff like that and going to the gym, doing those things, and I hurt my knee I tore my meniscus, but I think it was related to the squatting, but also I stretched my leg in like the pigeon pose and then I tore my meniscus. I've had like shoulder pain from benching really heavy weight. Yeah, so and then since I transitioned over to like calisthenics, like doing pull-ups and like push-ups and body weight squats, lunges, Bulgarian split squats, stuff like that, you don't need weight. And then if I do go to a squat rack, then I don't load it with weight. I just do a little bit higher repetitions, so it's for the longevity piece where I'm not going to injure myself. That's why I have these aches and pains throughout my life. So yeah, I think getting away from the dogma of fitness and doing things everyone else has done, I think you can really find your own path and do something that you love doing. That's something that you're going to adhere to. And I think that's the important thing, you know? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this relates to kind of what Braden said. He said we should focus on our strengths and do things that we enjoy, because in the long run, that's going to increase adherence to something.
Yeah, I think that what Braden said, it takes a lot of the pressure off of like our shoulders when we think of what fitness should be. For example, like I love dancing powwow. I grew up dancing powwow, and coming into adulthood, it was one of those things that I stopped doing for a few years, but then I picked it back up. And around summertime, when I'm like working like a 9-to-5 desk job, but like on the weekends we go to powwows, I think that's an example where I'm able to really incorporate that, like focusing on my strengths. And, you know, as long as I have like powwow and like dancing, that's my way of staying fit, or going for morning walks.
Yeah, I agree. Focusing on your strengths, because is something that you're good at and something that's familiar to you, and you're not starting over again. Like, sometimes it's good to start over and learn something new, but if you're always like starting over on things, you might not become great at something, you know, like whether that's dancing, right? Like if you're always starting something new and putting that to the side, starting something new, you might not ever get good at that one thing. And it's something that we love doing. We love powwow dancing and doing that, and I'll always come back to that, I think, because it has that sense of culture to it, and it always brings me back and it makes me feel whole. And then, yeah, like calisthenics, just I have a pull-up bar in the backyard, just doing pull-ups and push-ups and going for runs in the mountain, or going for walks on the land, going swimming, paddleboarding, things like that. I love doing that. It doesn't even feel like I'm working out really. It just feels good, and it's like something that I enjoy doing. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Mm-hmm. I think it's good that you focus on your strengths, but I think it's also good that we try new things as well. So for us, like we wanted to get into triathlon training, and a couple years, like just before COVID, I did my first triathlon, and I taught myself how to swim through triathlon videos. And then I got a trainer, an instructor for triathlons as well, and that really helped me with my swimming. And then you got into triathlons this year as well, and you really focused on your swimming. I helped as much as I could, but you really came a long way from the first time that you swam to the last time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because I'm trying new things more as an adult than I have as like a kid and a teenager. Growing up, all I really did was volleyball and hockey. It was the same thing every year. Once I turned 19, actually, I tried lacrosse for the first time, and then I got thrown into a couple lacrosse tournaments, and it was really fun being able to try that. And I was with my family too, so it really helped, you know, shake the nerves of being like a first-time lacrosse player as an adult and being in like these native tournaments. And then when I moved out here to Kelowna, I brought my hockey equipment, but there was no women's leagues that I was able to join. So I wanted to find a new way of fitness because I was also going to the gym and lifting weights and running on the treadmill, and like it just wasn't fulfilling me as much. I needed to try something that would be fun. So I tried kickboxing and jiu-jitsu for 6 months, and kickboxing I'd done before a couple times. But jiu-jitsu I'd never done, and it was really fun. I did it for 6 months. I stopped going because it got expensive to be going to that gym as a student. But like nonetheless, I tried something new, and I enjoyed it a lot. And sometimes I really miss it. Like I know that I'm going to go back into jiu-jitsu one day. And then swimming. I tried swimming for the first time as an adult, not just doggy paddling, but like actually like learning efficient strokes and everything. And the first few times it was really frustrating because my form wasn't good. But then the more I practiced, the more my body just like naturally adapted to it. And then I got the hang of it. And then I'll never forget like the first time that I hit a point in swimming laps where it felt like I was just meditating. It just felt like, it didn't feel like work. It just felt so calm and peaceful. And, you know, and now I love swimming. Now I got like a swimming membership, and it's not even triathlon season anymore. So yeah, I think it is important, especially as an adult, you know, to try new things, be open to trying new things. It's because, you know, a lot of people didn't get the privilege of having their sports paid for when they're a minor. You know, sports, it should be a right, but it's a privilege to be able to be in sports. And for those that weren't able to be in sports when they were younger and now they're adults and they're trying to figure out, okay, where do I start now on my fitness journey? Just don't be afraid to try something new. Try a new class because you might end up loving it.
All right, so I kind of want to leave on something that is my favorite part of like being physically active, and I think that is being on the land and gathering like medicines, berries, roots, stuff like that, and then harvesting an animal. There's so much reward, and it's so strenuous. Last year I got a moose, like 1,000-pound moose, and that was so much work to harvest that, get into like the back of the truck, and then the work doesn't end when you get in the back of the truck. You have to bring it home, and then you have to process it and all that. I don't need to get into the details. You kind of know what goes on with that. It just makes you feel so grateful that you were able to have that, and that food is medicine for our bodies. And when I think of like movement as medicine, I think of that because it makes me feel so whole. There's like that spiritual aspect of like that animal, you know, and then it's also being food and whatnot. And then like medicine for your body, and then like the movement itself helps you. And I really think that like being on the land and gathering your food encapsulates movement as medicine. And our ancestors did that to stay fit. They didn't sit there in the gym and like doing bicep curls and stuff like that. They stayed fit because of their lifestyle of being on the land. So I guess I want to hear a little bit of like what you think about like physical activity and like being on the land and gathering food.
I think that if you want to be fit for the rest of your life, it's important to have goals that feed your spirit and connect you with your culture too, connect you with your identity, because that will serve you for the longevity part of it. If you're going into fitness solely for, say, like superficial stuff, like the physical benefits of it, like how you look, basically. If you want to fit a certain body type, I think that the motivation will only last so long. You need to tie your fitness goals into, you know, your spirit, something that will feed your spirit, such as being on the land, walking on the land, harvesting medicines on the land. That's being active and then feeding your spirit too. It's like physical hygiene and spiritual hygiene is like, I think what you told me before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. And I trained doing like calisthenics and stuff like that, like the pulling and the pushing that really ties over to harvesting an animal, because you have to pull it and drag it and push it onto the truck. Yeah. and stuff like that. So I want to be strong to be able to do all these different things in my life and not just like be all jacked up because I'm lifting super heavy. I was like feeling all jacked up, like my back was feeling tight and sore because I was like lifting these heavy weights that I probably had no business lifting. And then now that I'm doing a lot of body weight stuff and like getting that full stretch, that full range of motion, and my body's able to handle that stress, I don't have those pains anymore, and I feel really good. I'm starting to, and then doing those things, you really focus on your mobility. But yeah, I think it all ties in to the bigger picture. And yeah. So that's movement is medicine, and like keep it nice and short. It's starting to get dark here, so I think it'd end on that note. What?